Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 26th part of the Q&A series in the lecture series True Dhamma, following in the footsteps of the Buddha. With me here is Saif, and today we will answer another bunch of your questions. Hopefully we will get like 3 or 4, as we usually take a bit of time to answer any of those questions. And yeah, let's just begin. This question here is kind of relevant, as we have encountered it quite a number of times in the past, and it goes as follows. Why don't Sotapannas just tell you that they are Sotapannas? Wouldn't that make things easier? It happens quite a number of times that people just ask us straight away, are you a Sotapanna? How would you answer to that?
Uh,
Yeah.
well, I'll say like before, I get the urge for such a question because
Mm.
obviously you don't want to waste your time um, with doctrines that are not coming from people who have gone beyond doubt. Like two Pathujanas talking to the as drastic as it sounds, like a Pathujana cannot make another Pathujana into a Sotapanna. That's just not how it works. That's why, like in the suttas, the condition for the right view is the words of another. So that means the words of another one who
Oh.
is a Sotapana or higher. So they can make you into a Sotapana. Um, so obviously you don't want to waste your time. And obviously, like in the contemporary landscape, thousands of years after the Buddha's life, there's like a million different doctrines. It's extremely confusing, not even just within Buddhism, but also outside of Buddhism. So I get the urge for it, but it's the reason why no one would even answer that, even if they're Sotapana or not, is because it's based on sort of wrong perspective in regards to your own experience. Because the assumption of the question is that, like, by asking someone and they say yes, I can somehow step outside of my experience, step outside my ignorant experience, my experience who is not sure about who's a Sotapa or not, and just say, okay, he said yes, so now I can see exactly that he's correct, and now he's a Sotapana, and now I'm full of faith. Like that's just not how it works. Like you can't step outside your experience. You are, even if the Buddha himself was in front of you, you still are just assessing them from your own perspective and using your own mindfulness, your own comprehension, your own interpretation to think, okay, are they someone who I should be listening to or not? So that's why in the suttas, the Buddha never says, just ask them if they're a Sotapanna or higher or if they're an Arahant. He says, if you want to find out if they're someone worth listening to, the only thing you can do is to just, for a long time, first of all, not just over one period of time, see if they are free from actions based in lust, aversion, and delusion and distraction. So it's that. And then do they speak in line with the suttas? Because that's another big way in which you can see, okay, the suttas are the best way to basically see what's in line with what the Buddha taught. And is the Dhamma that they teach, is it deep or is it just mundane, sort of secularized, sort of dumbed down version of the Dhamma that's just mundane discipline? Or is it talking about those things that are connected with transcendence, with supramundane release from suffering from this world, the next world? Is it on that level or is it mundane? So doing those things will give you a much better idea of whether there's someone that are worth listening to. But even then, you can never really be fully sure. The only way you can be fully sure is to become a Sotapana yourself. Um, so yeah, it's difficult, but it's just not the right way to go around it if you yourself want to figure out if someone is worth listening to.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing. You cannot check, even if that person tells you. You gain nothing from it. Your doubts will not be magically cleared away just because they say, yes, I'm a Sotapanna. You will be just as doubtful as before. That answer will not give you anything. And the other person who is answering you is also not exactly benefiting from that. The person who is, in fact, a Sotapanna usually inclines towards seclusion. They don't really want to be bothered all the time. It would be much better for them if they don't tell you that they are Sotapanna. So, for their own peace of mind, for their own practice, it's usually, I cannot speak for everyone and for every possible situation, but usually it's much better for them to not let you know that they are Sotapannas. Overall, that leads to a much calmer life for them, to a life that is much more in line with the Dhamma. And even if they are heavily inclined towards teaching, There will be sufficiently many people who will find them if they advertise themselves in what way, whatever way they wish, and they can teach all they want. But yeah, it's not really beneficial for any of the people, except for very rare cases. I don't want to rule that out. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, yeah. It's not like because some people think it's like, oh, it's because it's a Vinaya rule, but that only came much later. Like there was no rule at the beginning saying that Aryas cannot tell someone they're an Arya. There's nothing intrinsically tied to lust, aversion, delusion. Like even the Buddha
Mhm.
himself did not tire of telling everyone that he was the the Buddha himself, the most enlightened person in the entire world. But it doesn't mean he was conceited or acting out of lust, aversion, delusion. So it's not just because it's a Vinaya rule; it's just because it's not helpful for anyone. And yeah, it's like you were saying, from an Arya's perspective, it will usually lead to more trouble for them because if someone says that they're a Sotapanna, it usually leads to other people then instead of looking at their actions and looking at the Dhamma that they're talking about, it just starts to become a discussion centered around attainment. Or, would a Sotapanna say that? They're not humble enough. All of these things, and it becomes completely then separate from discussions of the Dhamma. And, discussions of the Dhamma should be, instead of talking about, who's got this attainment and who hasn't got this attainment, it should be just directed towards talk about dispassion, disentanglement, um, modesty. So modesty obviously is not going to be talking about your attainments. Those are the conversations that should be happening. Um, and then those are the conversations that will also let you know if they're worth talking to as well. Because a Sotapanna is not going to be talking, someone of right view, we should say, is not going to be talking all the time about attainments and attainments this and attainments that. They're going to be talking about those things we just mentioned: dispassion, disentanglement, sense of strain, virtue, jhana. They're talking about that most of the time. That's already a good sign that there's someone that's mind is directed towards the right things.
One could say that technically a Sotapanna is kinda implicitly making the claim that they are a Sotapanna with basically everything they say about the Dhamma. So when you speak with confidence about the Dhamma, then that kind of carries in your voice, that carries in your very actions. And whatever you
Yeah,
say, most of those things you can only know for yourself and thus speak with confidence on if you have seen the Dhamma for yourself. So it's kind of implicit in kind of everything that Sotapanna is
yeah,
doing. That's why you
yeah,
can observe them and see what they're doing and then see if it is in line with the Dhamma. And they can only be in line with the Dhamma if they know and see the Dhamma.
yeah. But even then, it's hard as well
Yeah.
because obviously, like, Sotapanna has natural confidence, but that doesn't necessarily mean that someone who has natural confidence is a Sotapanna, which is the hard part, isn't it? Because obviously, if you have no sense of right and wrong at the
Mhm.
beginning, or at least a complete sense of right and wrong,
Yeah.
then yes, you can be fooled by teachers. And there's a long
Mhm.
history of teachers being horrible, definitely not enlightened people. So like I said before, I do sympathize with the question, but
Yes.
like it's just the nature of things that you're never going to have this uh, perfect person telling you, okay, this person you should follow, this person you should not follow. You do have to use your rationality to a certain degree and go with what you think is the best ultimately. And ultimately, you will have to cycle through like a billion different teachers, probably. Um, I know I definitely did. So, yeah,
I always remember one of the verses from the Theragatha, I think, which is rather simple and rather short, and it just says, "One who sees, sees who doesn't. One who doesn't see, doesn't see, he sees who doesn't." Well, it's rather simple. You only
yeah,
know when you know. You only know when you have the right view. Then you know others who have the right view too. Before that, it's very, very difficult to assess.
yeah. And it sounds maybe like a bit like cult-like, oh yeah, if you know, you know. But uh, that's just the nature of things. Like,
Yes.
yeah, there's no way around that.
Mhm. It's a bit like in science. It's not democratic. You cannot just hold a majority vote on what is right and what is wrong or something like that.
Yeah,
Even one person can overthrow the entire thing. that's how it should be.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
I think that is enough on that question, and I think whoever asked now knows why. Pretty much no one ever talks about it. Yeah. I think maybe one last remark. Technically, the suttas say that householders can speak about it, and sometimes they do, but even when they do, they usually recognize in hindsight that it was not a very smart thing to do. But yeah. And in private, it might be that some other person who you think knows the Dhamma will tell you in private if you ask them very kindly and if they think that it is beneficial to talk about such things. But overall, I think it's very rare. Anyway, let's move to the next question before we get hung on this too much. And the next question goes as follows. Instead of enduring thoughts, doesn't the Buddha teach us to destroy, dispel, and not tolerate unwholesome thoughts? And wouldn't this be part of one's right effort? I guess this is one of the most popular sutta references that we get when people talk about the more active kinds of practice. And I think in one way or another we have answered this question many times. Not exactly this question here, but the essence of it. So, yeah. There is one sutta, I cannot remember the number, where the Buddha literally explains that whenever you detect an unwholesome thought, something that is not leading to dispassion, not leading to liberation, not to nibbana, then you should destroy it, dispel it, not tolerate it, and all those things. And what is the precondition to destroy an unwholesome thought, I would say? Well, first of all, you kind of need to know what wholesome and unwholesome even are. Otherwise, you do not know what to destroy. And even, yeah, if you want to destroy something, that very thing has to be there. There has to be an arisen thought. And then, when it is already there, you kind of have to deal with it in one way or another. The thought is kind of beyond your control. It's not a matter of willpower that you can make it go away. But you can tame and train the mind in a certain direction so that the future will have fewer of those unwholesome thoughts and better for you. That is kind of what you can do, and that is kind of what you should do, so that you can no longer be touched, can no longer be triggered into being greedy or averse or deluded about those thoughts. That is kind of what you want to achieve. So yeah, by all means, you want to destroy and dispel and not tolerate any of those thoughts, but you have to do it in the right way, so that it's actually working. You want to treat them with womb attention. You want to be equanimous toward those very thoughts. You want to be without any lust, any greed, any aversion toward those thoughts. That is kind of what you want to get rid of. The thoughts, as a byproduct, they will likely cease over time too, but you have to rob them of their fuel. That is kind of what you need to do. And that would be your right effort. But the precondition of that is obviously that you need to know right is right and wrong is wrong. You need to know wholesome and unwholesome. Without knowing wholesome and unwholesome, there's not even a way that you could identify what even is an unwholesome thought. And yeah, without knowing that, there's no way that you can dispel it. Anything you want to add?
Yeah. It's like unwholesome thoughts. The problem with the idea of like dispelling, destroying it in the way people normally think about it is that it comes with that normal assumption that everyone has, which is that those thoughts themselves are unwholesome. But normally in the sutras, it says thoughts are connected with desire, aversion, delusion. So it's not the thoughts themselves that are unwholesome, it's the mental states that are behind them. And the problem with people who then try to destroy, dispel the thoughts that they assume to be bad is that unwittingly they end up acting out of that sense of aversion and that sense of delusion in regards to those thoughts. And it becomes this like, okay, as soon as these thoughts arise, I need to start, doing all these things to try and get rid of it. And that's supposed to be part of one's right effort. And, it might actually create some calm. Obviously, if you're like constantly getting rid of these thoughts, it might lead to a mental state where, okay, harassing thoughts are not hitting me anymore. But in terms of that then leading to the ultimate calm, where nothing unwholesome can touch you, it becomes a lot more difficult then, because those thoughts are very likely are going to keep appearing. You're going to have to be still reactive against them. It's going to be much more difficult. So instead of trying to destroy and dispel the thoughts themselves, in that sense, it's better to think more on the level of your intentions of desire, aversion, delusion, distraction. that's what always comes back to craving and not the thoughts themselves.
Mhm.
And those thoughts can actually rise. And yes, they're connected with, for example, sensual desire. I might have some sensual thoughts arising, but I shouldn't be assuming the sensual desire to be in those thoughts. I need to be seeing the intention behind them. And as soon as I get rid of that intention, then those thoughts might still hover around for a bit, but they'll be robbed of their fuel, and they'll be robbed of the actual sensual desire aspect of those thoughts. So those thoughts will just be hovering and they'll be completely dead, basically. They won't be bothering you. They'll just be like flies, sort of hovering around you a bit, but there's not a problem at all. And then, yeah, if you stick with that for a while, because that fuel has been robbed, those thoughts will start to disappear. Not as a result of you trying to get rid of it, but as a result of you not fueling them any longer. And then, yes, when you're calm and you're dwelling without those thoughts appearing, then when those thoughts do start to appear, they won't be the same as when your mind is completely full of unwholesome desires and it's just going every single direction. No, you'll be dwelling in a really, really calm place. You'll be abiding in non-activity for 2 or 3 hours. Okay, then maybe a thought of sensual desire will start to come. Okay, then you can just destroy it because it's just this little tiny urge there. You can just say, okay, I'm not going to go in that direction. And the thought will just completely pop out of existence. That's fine. That's completely fine. That's actually exactly what the Buddha is asking you to do. But that's not the same as someone who's completely untrained in virtue, completely untrained in sense restraint, who's then, he's at work and, he's talking to someone and then they say something weird to them and they start getting angry. And now I'm going to start dispelling those thoughts while my mind is completely all over the place. No, no, no. You haven't been practicing gradual training. You haven't been practicing consciousness or intentions. You believe in deludedly. Now you just want to get rid of those thoughts because they pain you. So you're just completely acting out of aversion. So that's not how it works. If you're practicing on that long-term level, robbing the fuel of those thoughts slowly through gradual training, virtue, sense training, wakefulness, then you'll become much more skilled and be able to deal with those thoughts. Comes back to what we were saying in the last Q&A, right? It needs to be based on the Four Noble Truths. It needs to be based on consciousness of your intentions, of craving. That's what carries the whole practice. And if you're not conscious of the Four Noble Truths, that's how you start to misinterpret what the Buddha is saying, and you start to destroy thoughts, not even conscious of how that connects to the Four Noble Truths.
In that sense, you would always be doing the distraction with your sense of self, which is not really right. That's kind of exactly the opposite of the way you want to approach it. So yeah, it kind of needs the entire foundation of virtue, the entire foundation of the gradual training. And then it makes sense. You know exactly how to destroy thought without creating more aversion in the process or more lust or whatever. Then you know and can do that. But without that foundation, it's impossible. Except for that very shallow distraction or some shallow ignoring or some shallow changing of the circumstances. In the end, you want to be at peace even if they are unwholesome thoughts. You want to be unconditionally unmoved by anything that could possibly arise in your experience. And that also includes sensual prospects. You cannot avoid them. There will be agreeable things. There will be disagreeable things. I mean, even the Buddha was followed by Mara for like 7 years after his awakening. And he threw temptations at him from time to time. It is just that those temptations were empty because the Buddha has removed the poisonous part from his experience, which is the craving, which is the clinging, which is the desire. Everything else, every other part of experience is fine to have. It's just that those 3 poisons have to be gone. And just one part of your experience. You do not have to shout out everything or something like that, like some of the more modern traditions suggest, that you have to literally remove your consciousness or something to be at ease. That's not how it works. You just have to remove those 3 poisons, and then you will be at ease.
Yeah. And it's not even just thoughts as well. It's even things like pressure, for example. I think that's quite a common misinterpretation that I see, that they start to assume that like when I am pressured, that's the craving itself. But pressure is just a sort of unpleasant sensation. Like, pressure can arise, and pressuring, my senses are pressuring me, my thoughts are pressuring me. It's very unpleasant, but that does not imply craving in itself. All of those things can arise. So I can go to a situation where I see an attractive sensual prospect. Let's say it's food, for example. Maybe I have a problem with food. I see it, pressures are rising, thoughts are rising. Okay, normal person will start to think, okay, that triggering sense contact, triggered this pressure, that's my craving. But it's not. That's just unpleasant pressure. That's it. You can actually let that arise, endure, and pass. There's no problem there unless you get involved with it. So letting that arise and pass, having no craving, no aversion to the fact that this pressure has arisen, because yeah, you couldn't control the fact that you saw that sense contact and that pressure rose. That's been trained in you for years and years. So let it arise. It's not a problem. You just need to not act out of it, not follow it, and then just let it pass. And you will realize then that all of this pressure can arise, fill me up, and it'll just empty itself, and that's it. And there's no problem whatsoever. And that can continue infinitely. Just infinite pressure. It doesn't matter. It'll just empty itself, and it's fine. So even that as well, it's not a problem. In the same way, thoughts are not a problem. You just need to not act out of craving.
Yeah. No part of your experience is actually problematic unless the craving part. The senses in themselves are pure, which includes the mental sense. And in themselves, they are fine. There's no problem with them. You have to add the problem to them by doing actions born of craving with your body, with your speech, or with your mind. Then it becomes problematic.
Yeah. As the Buddha said, it's not like the clinging is not part of the aggregates, but it's not independent of the aggregates either. It's in regards to the aggregates. So yeah, your clinging is in regards to all of these things. It's not part of the thoughts, not part of the pressure, it's not part of the unpleasant feeling. It's what you're adding on top of it. Which is why Sotapatti is, we normally talk about it as like removing these layers of craving, removing your intentions of lust, aversion, aversion, rather than doing something extra on top of your experience. Once you've removed all of those, then what you said is left the purity of the aggregates, purity of the senses, unaffected by delusion.
The clinging is kind of burning independence on the aggregates, like a candle flame is burning independence on a wick and a wax and whatever. That's one simile that the suttas use very often. Fuel is the right word. Upadana. Yeah. Anyway, I think we hopefully answered that question sufficiently well. If not, please just post any follow-up questions down below. And I think we still have time for one or two other questions, so let's move on. And the next question goes as follows. I want to know if lust, hate, and ignorance exist independently or if they depend on one another. This question is for you, I think.
Okay. I would say very much they depend on one another, because if you think about what each of these are, if we translate at least lust, hate, and ignorance in response to the three feelings that are present, so lust in regards to pleasant feeling, hate in response to unpleasant feeling, and it might need a bit more effort to interpret this way, but ignorance in regards to neutral feeling, then yes, if you're going towards the pleasure, if your mind is dependent on pleasure, it means that anything below that threshold of pleasure is going to become something that you do not like anymore. So that means neutral feeling is going to become intolerable to you, and it's going to mean the unpleasant feeling is going to become intolerable to you. So the more you engage in lust, the more you will hate, the more ignorant you will be. The more you hate, the more lustful you will be. The more you'll be dependent on constant pleasure. So all of these things are very, very, very intimately connected. There are even sutras about that, where the Buddha says, okay, why does irritability exist? And we think about irritability as connected to ill will, usually connected to aversion, connected to anger. But then he says, oh yeah, it exists because of lust. So it's because you're attracted to pleasure, dependent on it, seeking it out. That means that when some unpleasant feeling comes away, which it will, the mind can't hack it. The mind just completely reacts in regards to it. Wants to get away from it, becomes irritable in regards to it, becomes angry. So all of these things are connected. And it's the same for the five hindrances as well. It's not like you really get rid of sense desire and then ill will and then restlessness. No, if you're getting rid of sense desire completely, you're also getting rid of the rest. It all comes sort of as a package. The only one I would say that is maybe more deeper than the rest of them is the ignorance. So normally the ignorance is not really revealed until you get rid of the more grosser influxes of lust and hate. So once you're basically not engaging with those really gross forms of lust towards pleasure, hatred, the mind is calming down a bit more. You are starting to dwell in seclusion. You aren't distracting yourself. Then those deeper, more subtle hindrances of distraction, of boredom, of excess persistence, of slackness, those do start to reveal themselves as basically the most subtle ways in which you respond with craving to your experience, of trying to get away from what's current present. And you realize then that those more subtle hindrances, like boredom, are the reason why lust and hatred are also present. So you start to realize then, for example, if I am abiding in non-activity and I'm trying to get rid of the ignorance of the neutral feeling through boredom, then I start to realize if I act out of this sense of boredom, if I act in response to trying to get rid of this neutral feeling, give it a few more times, and that will be leading then even more, and then it goes towards acting towards pleasure of the senses. So you realize there's this intimate connection where the subtler hindrances go completely naturally into the stronger hindrances. And when you do that, that's where danger of the slightest fault becomes apparent. You realize it's not worth it even to enter into this smidge of boredom, even if it seems quite in itself harmless. Like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna distract myself by doing a little bit of work. But even that you will see as like hot coals, because you realize by entering into that domain even a little bit, I'm accepting that I'm entering the entire domain of being bound by trying to get rid of what I'm feeling, and that's going to lead at some point or another into lust, into hatred. So yeah, you could say the ignorance is sort of the deepest one, but ultimately they're all dependent on each other. So yeah.
No. And even on a very mundane level, if you are not practicing on such an advanced level yet, you can very much see that engaging in a tiny bit of lust usually leads to more lustful behavior in the future. Taking some sweets lead to wanting more sweets and even more sweets. And at some point you're eating an entire cake or something like that. So that naturally spirals out of control. There's no end to desire. There's no end to craving, really. And even the very word craving is kind of the umbrella term that includes lust, hate, and ignorance all at once. Craving in itself is a term that describes the three. And you can further subcategorize them into the three aspects of lust, hate, and ignorance, as Saif did. Those are the three things that craving is made of. And as we have said many times before, you can also weaken craving through any of those aspects, really, or any of the two, mainly. You first have to work with the gross stuff, as in you could practice non-lust, or you can practice non-hatred, depending on your natural inclination. And then the more subtle, ignorance, restlessness, and all those things start surfacing. And then you can start working with those. So they very much depend on each other. They are, in a sense, sides of the same coin, even if a coin has two sides and not three. Yeah, that's usually how it works.
Yeah, and the fact that ignorance is sort of the most deepest one is basically why we end up saying that yes, you need to restrain the lust and hatred first before you're working on that sort of deeper ignorance level. So, if you're trying to uproot your delusion through seeing impermanence and all that, it's not really going to work unless you've gotten rid of the more grosser forms of lust and hate, which, as the sutras go, they sort of muddy the water. They dye it a certain color, they make it ruffled, they go in every single way. So, you can't even see beneath the surface. You need to calm the waves a bit, and then subtler things will start to be seen, including the very root of ignorance, which manifests weirdly through your conduct. So weirdly, you manifest your ignorance through your boredom, through your random actions, which are rooted in just not seeing what's being currently felt. Like you just completely ignore it. You try to go towards your senses, try to get some sort of activity there, and you realize it's all because that neutral feeling it's felt painfully for whatever reason, because of assumptions, because of what it is. It's neutral, but it's felt painfully, and that's why we try to get rid of it through distractions, through wherever it is. It's because if you stop for a second and you face the neutral feeling, the factor of ignorance is going to start dropping. If you stop distracting yourself, the nature of your experience is going to become more apparent. The nature of impermanence, the nature of uncontrollability. Because, as we've said before, it is the nature of your experience. Whether you're looking at it or not, it is the nature of your experience. You just need to stop distracting yourself from it. It becomes very easily apparent there. That's felt painfully, so we distract ourselves. So, uprooting ignorance, it means uprooting our ignorant conduct, literally the act of ignoring your experience.
Yes. And I think that's quite interesting that you mentioned that it is painful. In fact, it is so painful that we have designed an entire system around punishing people with that neutral feeling, making them encounter it in solitary confinement when people are in prison. We put them in a room where they have no distraction, and then they have to face their neutral feelings. And that's not exactly pleasant. In fact, most people that are in solitary confinement want out. They don't want to be there. They kind of go mad. They go crazy when they do that.
Yeah.
And then there are noble disciples who train themselves in that, so that they can conquer even the neutral feeling, even their dependence on distraction.
Yeah, and then once it's conquered, as I was to say, once it's known, once you're not ignoring it, then it becomes pleasant, because the real nature of it is neutrality. It's just equanimity.
Mhm.
So then you're abiding alone without distractions. It's like, oh yeah, this is actually quite calm. I don't know why I was, making my mind go crazy going after this and that before, when I can just sit alone. And just, mind is completely, completely tranquil. And doesn't matter what pressure comes my way, I'm not going to go there because, well, mine's already calmed in regards to it.
That perspective, it's not worth it to go for any distraction because you are already peaceful here and now. Why should you go for anything else?
Yeah. That's why, like in the sutras, it says that until you basically are able to experience that peace, the mind to some degree is going to still be attracted to sensual pleasures because it knows no other peace apart from sensual pleasures. But once you abide in that state of the neutral feeling, of not ignoring your experience, the pleasure of clarity, the pleasure of calm, the pleasure of tranquility, the mind just cannot go back towards sense desires in the same way. It's going to be seen with a lot of distance, and you're going to see, okay, if I go back in that direction, it's the direction of non-calm, non-tranquility, the direction of being completely bound wherever I'm feeling. I'm going to have to either trying to respond with aversion, with lust, with distraction, whatever feeling I'm going to be feeling, I'm just not going to be happy with it. Whereas right now, whatever I'm feeling, I'm happy with it. So why would I ever go back to that domain that I was in before?
It's kind of the thing. What you wanted before was peace nonetheless. You wanted peace, but you did not know how to get it. And now you know how to get it. You are even dwelling in it. And now the prospect of attaining that peace by any other means comes up. And you clearly know, okay, why would I do that? I already got what I wanted. Why should I do any kind of other technique to get there when I already have it? So it does not make sense to go in that direction anymore.
Yeah. And it's not even like we would have some sort of fear of missing out or something where it's like, oh my God, I'm going to be missing my old sensual pleasures I used to love. It's like, no, you see it as that mind state. It's not really that pleasurable after all. It was only pleasurable because you weren't focusing on the fact that it was based in that sense of lust and that sense of scattered-mindedness. You were focused completely on the sense contact itself. But now that you understand the intention behind it and where it's rooted and they escape from it, there's no fear of missing out. Yeah, this is much better.
The only thing you would be missing out on is suffering.
Yeah, that's why it says the only thing that they see is suffering arising and suffering ceasing for an Arya.
Yeah, that's kind of how it is. So they come as a package. Let's finish it with that. And yeah, I think we are already approaching the ending of this recording window, so I don't think that we have time for another question. So at that point, let's make a cut and use the other questions for another Q&A video. So yeah, if anyone else has any follow-up questions, then please put them down in the comments below, and we will answer them at a later point. We do those here rather sporadically whenever we have time, so it might take a while until we answer them, but at some point we will probably approach your question and answer it. But yeah, as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy what we do, feel free to like, subscribe to the YouTube stuff. But until then, we wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.